you're listening to Sustainably Geeky. I'm your host, Jennifer, and this is episode 92. As a reminder, you can listen on anywhere you get your podcast, YouTube, and we are on all the socials, and you can support us on Buy Me a Coffee. Today, I am excited to be speaking about extended producer responsibility, or EPR, and waste reduction in both the public and private sectors with Sarah Currie-Halpern. Sarah is the co-founder of Think Zero LLC, a consultancy that helps business owners implement sustainability and waste reduction practices that are both feasible and financially beneficial. So Sarah, welcome to the show. And can you start by telling us a little about your background and how you came to work in this field?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. My passion for waste started very, very early. I helped start my town's recycling program in Greenwich, Connecticut as a small child, and really realized at that point that there was this tremendous need for diversion of our materials, for seeking more value out of our waste materials. I realized at that time that this was becoming a crisis. And this is, 1985. So that's really where the passion started. And I wasn't able to turn that into a career until a little bit more like my early 30s, when I realized this could really be a career. Back in the 80s and even 90s, this really wasn't a career in sustainability and waste. So it took a little while to realize that, no, this is obviously a meaningful career. And fast forward to 2020 and 2026, and there are so many people that make waste and waste reduction diversion a career, and it's just really exciting to see it's come so far. So that's kind of what got me there today. I can just give a little bit more on my resume background. So I went to work for the mayor's office of New York City under Mayor de Blasio in 2014. And ran solid waste programs for the mayor's office, and did a lot of work with the Department of Sanitation in New York City at the time. And that really launched my career in waste. Previous to that, I was doing marketing and real estate, but always knew, sustainability is where I belonged. And then when I was in the mayor's office, I really saw the need in the private sector for waste reduction, diversion, consulting services. The reason being is that there were waste consultants out there, but a lot of them were kind of just focused on either being brokers or just kind of moving waste from point A to point B to point C, or maybe some like light diversion, but not really strongly focused on reduction. And at Think Zero, we pride ourselves on waste reduction. We're all about source reduction and waste reduction. We do end up doing plenty of work on diversion, which is what you're diverting from landfill incineration, but we really try and always keep the focus on waste reduction. So that's it.
I think that's so important to point out too, because when we hear about how we handle our waste, you think of the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. People always want to focus on the recycle one. And it's like, that's actually probably the least important one. It's the reduction part that we really need to focus on, both as consumers and I'd say businesses and public entities. But it's just the easier one to do, right? If I don't want to have to stop using as much stuff, if I can just throw it in a bin and say it's recycling.
And even more so today, is we're realizing there's so many microplastics in the world. Our bodies have a lot of microplastics in them. And so, recycling is really just sort of extending that process and keeping plastics out in the world and in our environment and in our bodies. Right. So it's tricky because obviously I'm a big supporter of recycling, but I'm a bigger supporter of source reduction and thinking about how we can change to alternative materials and using other materials that are really healthier for our ecosystems and for our own selves.
Yeah, it's both and not one or the other. So so you were clearly ahead of your time working on this stuff back in the 80s, when I imagine I don't think there would be a ton of recycling programs in the States and in small towns. So yeah, you've had quite a journey to get where you are today, and now you're working in a private consultancy, and a big part of your work is on EPR. So can you start by just defining what is EPR and why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. So extended producer responsibility, or EPR, as you say, is a strategy to add all the estimated environmental costs associated with a product throughout the product life cycle to the market price of that product. This is really important because the onus has been for a very long time on municipalities and on consumers to basically pay the price for waste management of our products. And now we're shifting that onus onto the corporations or the manufacturers who produce those products.
Yeah, and there's been a long history of companies doing this, like pushing the responsibility out to the consumer. And like one example is, soda bottles used to have a deposit system, used to be made of glass, and people would take them back for the money. They were widely recycled, and now they've shifted mostly to plastic or aluminum. And aluminum's better, I guess, because it is infinitely recyclable. But yeah, it's less about what can we do to make it, I guess, easier on the consumer. Instead, we're shifting the blame to them. So can you talk about like that history and how we got to this point, and then how we can get consumers to maybe unlearn this idea that it's their fault and that we have to be the ones to fix all this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you look, it's a regional, we have to look at this regionally, because I would say Europe and some other parts of the world are doing a far better job than we are on this, on maintaining some of those systems. But if we look at just the US, really convenience has played a big part in this. People want more convenience, and corporations are happy to oblige with that convenience. So I think that's really a large part of why we've seen a move away from those reusable systems we had in the past. Like if you look back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, and earlier, of course, we had meaningful reuse systems. We had our milkman or milkwoman, perhaps, delivering our milk. And we had, as you said, these return systems where you were returning for a nickel or for a dime or whatever that return amount was. We had better systems in place, and we did get away from those systems, particularly in the US. And why did that happen? And I think convenience played a huge part. People have gotten used to the convenience of single-use disposables and how easy that is for their daily lives, whether they're on the run or even at home. If you look back to some advertisements from the 40s and 50s, certain corporations were really pushing single-use disposables as a means to make daily life easier for people. I have a vivid one in my mind right now, and I'm sorry I don't have it to show you on screen, but basically that's a mom in a home serving the meal to her family on disposables for the very first time, and then being able to just literally clean that slate, clean that table off, and throw it all away and wipe her hands of it. No cleanup whatsoever. So there is this argument for convenience and for less cleaning and everything else. But of course, we now know in 2026 what that means for the world, and what that means for pollution, and what that means for filling up our landfills. And as I just mentioned before, the microplastics in our bodies, we understand all the ramifications now that we didn't before. So I think it was just almost like this golden notion of single-use disposables as so easy and convenient in modern day. But we didn't understand all of the downsides to that, or all the negative impacts it would have.
Yeah, I have vivid memories of my childhood and even into, young adulthood, eating hot food off of styrofoam plates, and just thinking back about like how much of that got into my system because we didn't know any better.
Exactly.
And, it's not just the actual waste itself. Like you said, it's the stuff that is in the products we're using that's then getting into our food cycle systems and our bodies. And oh, it's such a mess.
Exactly. And then you asked about unlearning it and how we're going to get consumers there. And I think it's all possible, but it's very slow. And I think we have to have the incentives in place to make it work. We are starting to see more of that. And I think we'll talk later in the podcast about some of the systems that are coming into play. But how do we get consumers there? And I think that we know from our research that there's a couple different things that really make consumers tick. One of those is financial bottom line. What's it going to cost me? Or how am I going to save money? As far what's the bottom line from my wallet and my family's wallet. So I think it has to either come from that perspective. It has to somehow either save them money or break even for them to make the choice, make the choice for reusables versus disposables. And then the other thing is health. So what is my family's, how does this impact my family's health and well-being? So I think we need to really strongly be driving this message home now that this is a major health concern. And thank goodness all this research is coming out about microplastics in our bodies and what that means for us. But it's not just microplastics. It's also the impacts that landfills and incinerators have on air pollution, on water quality, on things like that. So I think it's really important that we're all driving that message home of these the health impacts. And that could start to drive consumer behavior as well. We're already seeing it drive some consumer behavior, right? More and more people are starting to become aware that actually a plastic water bottle that's been sitting around for a couple of years on a shelf somewhere, that water is going to contain a lot of microplastics versus,
Yeah.
filtered water from your tap.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with the convenience factor of disposables because, like you said, you can just literally put it all into a trash can. But when you start making it really more expensive for people, like I live in Ireland, and there's fees now if you use disposable cups when you get coffees. So they're incentivizing people to bring their own and go for the reusable options. But it's and I'd say here the culture is already a little more
Mhm.
sustainably minded, but there's still anywhere you go, there's things you can improve on, and yeah, it's going to take a lot of work. But like you said, the science is on our side.
Yes.
So let's talk a bit about how these EPR measures can be implemented. I know that there's some regulations and legislation that are starting to come up around the world. So can you give a few examples of those and how effective they have or haven't been?
Absolutely. So if we look at US as a landscape, US is a little younger in the EPR laws. We have a lot of great examples in the US. I think it's a little harder to say how they're going as of yet. Many of them are just enacted. So I'll give a couple examples and then we can chat about it. So Maine is one of the pioneers. Maine enacted its stewardship program for packaging in 2021. So they've had significant developments in rural adoptions in late 2024 and early 2025. Producers are expected to register and report 2025 data by May 31st, 2026. So you can kind of see the timeline here. They're one of the early adopters in the US, and they're really just having producers start to register and report data, next month and through the summer of 2026. So it's very early to say what the results are yet in the US. I think it's all going to be much clearer in the next year or 2 years. What we have is really just the excitement of this all moving forward in the US. A couple other examples are Oregon. They have their Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, and this requires producers of packaging, paper, and food serviceware to register with the Approved Producer Responsibility Organization, PRO, Circular Action Alliance, CAA, and begin paying fees by July 2025. I do know that Oregon, unfortunately, has had a small lawsuit related to this, so that's something that they're dealing with. So they've had a little bit of a hiccup, but that should all still be moving forward for Oregon. They're certainly one of the early adopters as well. And then, of course, there's Colorado. So I'm actually based in Colorado. I'm based in Boulder, Colorado. It's a really exciting place for EPR. There's a lot going on. I sit on the board of EcoCycle, which is who's one of the major players in basically writing the legislation around EPR and what EPR is going to look like. So Colorado's producer responsibility program for statewide recycling is called HB 2022-1355 is the policy, and it was enacted in 2022. Producers were required to register with the PRO by October 1st, 2024, and must submit reporting data by July 31st, 2025. They're a little delayed on that schedule, but things are definitely moving forward in Colorado. There's been a lot of discussions about making sure reusables are a big part of the Colorado EPR, so that this would mandate reusables programs. And then, of course, there's a typical, recycling program whereby basically manufacturers are going to have to pay into a recycling system. This is going to be great for Colorado because we have a very low recycling rate. I think I last saw that the most updated diversion rate for the state of Colorado is around 15 or 16%. And we're really anticipating that EPR is going to help that a lot and really boost that recycling rate. And then, of course, the only other one I'll mention now is California. California is always sort of on the bleeding edge for the U.S., as we know, for sustainability policy and legislation. And they have their Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act, or SB 54, for those who want to look up the name of the legislation. That was enacted in June 2022. The implementation rules are currently being revised, adding complexity to determining compliance requirements. Registration with the PRO opened in August 2025, and reporting of the data was due by November 15, 2025. PRO fee obligations start in January 2027. So that's when the manufacturers will have to start paying their fees into the system. So that's just kind of like a little overview of some of the lead adopters, but you can see it's still fairly early stage in the US in the sense that we don't really have a lot of results yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I know on your blog there was some talk about an EU regulation that's either in the works or recently passed. And do you know much about that or other countries that might be doing this well, or is it all still kind of so new that it's, too early to tell?
I don't really have the information on that today. It's fairly early from what I know. But yeah, we could certainly, you know, touch base on it again in the next. I think this year we're gonna have a lot more information.
Yeah, more to come on that. As you were rattling off all that information, and you were talking about fees the companies might have to pay, the first thing I thought of, well, are they just going to pass that on to the consumer? Because that's typically what happens. So, do you think that will be the case, or I guess what other ways will things change for both the businesses and consumers as these regulations roll out?
Yeah. So I think there is a fair chance that some of this will be passed on to consumers, unfortunately, but hopefully that will be pretty nominal. I think one of the positives we'll see as consumers is more sustainable packaging. So I think the EPR laws are designed to drive improvements in packaging design. Really they're asking these EPR, the groups that are writing the legislation and the way they're writing it, they're really calling on businesses to proactively evaluate and adapt their packaging to be more sustainable. And so what that might look like for the consumer is hopefully reduced, minimized overall packaging. So you'll see lighter packaging and you'll see smaller packaging volume. So where you might have seen previously like a package that was quite large. I mean, we've all seen some pretty harrowing things, right? Where you might go shopping, particularly for clothing or higher end clothing, and it's packaged in not just one box, but maybe several different packaging of things like, a box and a box and a box. Hopefully this will reduce that. I think this could even reduce, sort of your mailing packaging that you receive, where we're receiving smaller boxes. I mean, I think we've all had a situation where you receive a box and it's like massive. It's much greater than the size that you would have needed for that one small item. So really manufacturers getting smarter, not just about the packaging themselves, but how they're the mailing of packages as well. And then that might also look like redesign. So optimizing packaging for recyclability or compostability and reusability. Many of the EPR laws are baking in language that would either require or strongly encourage recyclability, compostability, and or reusability. I know, for example, in the Colorado one, they're really emphasizing reuse, which is really exciting to see. Some of the others look a little bit different depending upon the materials they're focused on. But that's one thing that we might be seeing is some of that sustainable redesign. And then, of course, incorporating recycled content. So utilizing post-consumer recycled or PCR materials where feasible. And that's really exciting because actually, when you look at life cycle analysis, one of the greatest indicators for how environmentally preferable that material or item is the amount of recycled content. So we like to see products that have higher amounts of recycled content or maybe even 100% recycled content. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that with these EPR laws coming down the pipe. And then finally, harmful substances is another one that's super important. So businesses are encouraged to avoid problematic materials and intentionally added toxic chemicals. In other words, to say they're encouraged to not include toxic chemicals or really limit the amount of toxic chemicals. I think this is really exciting for all humans, right? It's not just babies and maybe, people who are sensitive groups that have to think about this. We all need to think about that. And of course, we all want to have less toxic chemicals in our products and packaging. So I think this is a real positive. So those are some of the things that I think consumers can look forward to with EPR laws.
Yeah, and I have noticed like when companies put on their packaging made with recycled material or certain amount of reclaimed whatever, it kind of does stand out, and they are starting to kind of brag about that. So I think they're learning that this is a good thing, good for their bottom line. Like consumers want to see that, and it can affect, people's buying choices. Like if one thing is made with 100% recycled, whatever, and this isn't, I'm going to go for the one that's recycled if everything else is equal. So
that's right.
So going back to the U.S., I know you mentioned some great state laws that are coming up, but the federal level, is there any hope, in your opinion, that any federal EPR laws could be passed, specifically given the current administration's anti-regulation, pro-business stance, or maybe is there even an economic case that could help? Because a lot of times that's the thing that gets people who are resistant to this kind of stuff, over the line as well. I don't care about the environmental impact, but if it's good for the economy or good for my bottom line.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, well, it's unlikely anything would happen under the current administration, as we know. There was something put forward on June 24th, 2025. Bipartisan sponsors introduced HB 4109, the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act. If it becomes law in the future, HB 4109 would require the EPA to conduct a nationwide assessment of the recycling and composting programs in the US, with the goal of using such information to make improvements. So it is quite vague, but I would say it's positive that this was put out by sponsors. And I think I'm not as familiar with policy at the federal level, or how long essentially that can stay out there before it has to move forward to be a bill, or, move forward. But I think it's positive that we're seeing some thought about this at the federal level. And, even knowing that it won't happen under this administration, it really puts us in a better position with the next administration to hopefully jump on this idea or others, and maybe even grow and expand on it. Obviously, this is, not specific. It's not really, an EPR mandate in any way, but it does at least suggest that we need to not only look at recycling and composting programs across the US, but maybe even we could have mandates for certain areas must have these programs and things like that. So it opens up, I think, the floodgates potentially for more of this type of work at the federal level.
Yeah, it would be amazing to have curbside compost and recycling in every community. I come from a place in Texas that didn't have either of those things after a while because they had to cut budgets, and that's the thing that got chopped. But hopefully that comes back. It comes to everywhere. So let's kind of switch to your background in public waste management. And I recognize this is going to vary by country and even state there in the US, but could you kind of give just a broad overview of how our waste is managed overall? Like, what's the system today?
Yeah. Yeah. So, essentially, we have in many areas, we have a difference between residential homes versus commercial entities and how they're collected. It varies really city to city and state to state as far as the system they have in place, whether that might be a private hauler or it might be a municipal system. But either way, right, in every area in the US, you have your materials collected by a waste hauler. That's typically a licensed waste hauler in many areas. And then they are taken to a transfer station. And then from a transfer station, your materials are either taken to a MRF, which is a material recovery facility, where some of those materials are recovered for value, basically. At a recycling center or material recovery facility, they are trying to combine the same materials. So you would have typically number 1 and 2 plastic combined together. If facilities are accepting other types of plastic, maybe number 5 plastic or others, they are baling those materials. Same with your metals and your paper and everything else. And then they are going on to other facilities that will further process those and then will sell those materials. Many of our materials are still being sold to other countries around the world. China did put in place a block on many of our materials a couple years ago, but we are still selling a lot of our materials from the US to Asia. From what I hear from our waste hauling friends and others in the field, Canada, Mexico, North America, there are plenty of buyers, even in the US. So it just really varies as far as, your recycling center and who they're selling to and who their connections are and things like that. Glass is one that is a challenge in many areas. Glass actually is not recycled in a lot of areas because they can't properly process it. It's not that glass isn't recyclable. It's highly recyclable, but it has to be processed in the correct way. So basically it has to be processed in a particular way. And also they want it culled out into different colors. So clear glass, as I understand, it has to be separated from green, from brown, from blue, and all the other colors that are out there as well. And these are more expensive facilities to have and to run. And so they just don't exist in all areas in the US. So we have many areas in the US that don't have any glass recycling. So while glass is thought of as a very sustainable material, I like to think of glass as actually for reuse. Glass is more for reuse in many areas because it's not actually being recycled and therefore it's being landfilled or incinerated. And so just going on down the line, we talked about a material recovery facility or recycling facility. The materials that are not going to a material recovery facility are going to be going to landfill or incineration. And then some materials, like food materials and organic materials, will be going to a compost facility. We still have pretty low composting across the US. Most areas still do not have composting, but it's certainly growing. I mean, you have whole swaths of, Colorado, of California. You have Maine, and Massachusetts also has an organics mandate. New York City is now requiring their residents to have to participate in composting, as well as many of their businesses. I know New Jersey is considering certain organics rules. So you do have certainly organics diversion is growing across the US, but it's still relatively small. It'd be interesting to include backyard composting. Of course, many folks are choosing to backyard compost on their own or do their own methods of organics diversion. I do always like to say that, organics is one of the single best things you can do in your household to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help prevent climate change. Because methane, as we know, is a very potent greenhouse gas. So when it's going to landfills or incinerators, it is releasing methane into the atmosphere, and that is warming the planet at a faster rate than other gases going into the atmosphere. So we really want to be diverting our food scraps. So food scraps is a really important piece of that puzzle of where our waste is going. And then finally, landfills and incinerators. We still have a huge amount of our waste going to landfill and incineration. I know that landfills are the 8th largest source of methane emissions in the US. So there's a lot of methane still coming off landfills across the US. It's a huge problem. We're also running out of landfill space. And then, of course, there's other issues with landfills. Basically, when liquids go through landfills, there's something called leachate, which runs off those landfills. And it's essentially like a toxic liquid that leaks out of landfills. And so landfills are bad. We want to be getting away from landfills. But unfortunately, the primary method of disposal still in the US today is landfilling. And then the other method is incineration. I think some people like to think of incineration as a little bit better than landfilling. That is not true. Incineration is essentially burning our waste into the atmosphere. And there's all sorts of toxic chemicals that come off of our incineration processes. Even though these plants try and scrub and do the best they can to be cleaner and reduce air emissions, there's still plenty of air emissions of chemicals that go into the atmosphere when you're burning waste. You can't avoid it because there's lots of toxic materials and waste. And then the other issue is IBA, or incinerator bottom ash. So basically, when you're burning, what do we know about burning? We all know, like if you have a fire in your fireplace, there's ash at the bottom. It's the same as an incinerator. And that ash that's generated by incinerators is toxic. And there actually isn't really a good solution for that incinerator bottom ash. So currently what they're doing with it is just burying it in the ground, which is not a great solution because, as we all know, things can shift in the ground. And then eventually that toxic issue is back, something that we have to deal with. So so that's how our waste is currently being managed today. What we want to be doing in the US and across the world is moving more towards as much diversion as possible. So we want to be seeking out the values in our materials and either reusing them, repairing them, keeping them in the loop, remanufacturing them. At end of life, we want to ideally be recycling or composting them instead and diverting them from landfill incineration.
Yeah, so it's really depressing to think that we're still just throwing things into a big hole, and that's kind of probably what our ancestors did thousands of years ago. Like, we haven't come up with, it's sort of better because we line them and we try to, make use of the land afterwards, but it's ugh.
Yeah, well, our ancestors were actually far less wasteful. Our ancestors thought a lot about how to, use all the materials. They were much more thrifty with materials. I mean, think about it. If someone had, and it doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or a poor family, our ancestors thought a lot about preserving our materials and getting much more use out of them than we do today. So that's a big part of the conversation. It's like shifting that mindset. And that's a lot of what I work on. It's shifting people's mindset towards thinking of all the materials that we come across in every day as having value and really getting more value out of our materials and not wasting them. So I think it's really important part of the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And they weren't producing things that take thousands of years to break down either, like we are.
That's right.
It's a huge problem. And as the population grows and as people's appetite for things grow, it's just gotten worse and worse over the years. So we do have to really go back and think about how can we use less and how can we do more with the things we already own and not, continually buy.
Correct.
Um,
I talk about consumption a lot, as actually consumption is the core sustainability issue. Although we obviously as humans consume,
yeah.
um, this endless chain of consuming and consumption is a huge issue, and it's really an environmental problem. And so, if we think back to the days of before, our ancestors, again, they were making stuff. They were doing a lot more DIY. They were making their own foods, making their own clothes. To the extent that we can get back to that, I think that's great. But obviously, that doesn't work for a lot of people. A lot of people are not going to be able to be sewing their own clothes and things like that. And that's where reuse and buying secondhand and these notions really come into play. I know that I personally have a lifelong commitment to always buy secondhand first, and not just for clothing and shoes, but for all materials. And it's really interesting once you start to do your research on this that actually there is a secondhand market for almost everything you could need today. So, I use eBay a lot. I use Poshmark a lot. I use other sources, even Etsy. Etsy actually has a lot of secondhand stuff on there now. Facebook Marketplace, of course. If we're talking about furniture, there's actually a variety of different apps out there now that are for furniture, for secondhand furniture. I know Apartment Deco. I believe this other one is called Kayo. And then there's Chair-ish. I love Chair-ish. And then there's First Dibs. And First Dibs is a little more high-end, furniture. But there are just so many different outlets these days for buying secondhand. It's really incredible.
Yeah, I love thrifting, and it's almost like a challenge, when you're looking for something specific to go out and find the most unique, I don't know, affordable thing you can find in charity shops or whatever. But I remember growing up, there was a big stigma around it. And it was so embarrassing to go to school and people knew you wore thrifted clothes. And now it's like become popular. And, it's one of the few fads or trends I don't mind. And I just hope it sticks around because people see the value in it and the fun in it, actually.
Absolutely, me too. And I think there is a bit of a stigma around thrift shops, unfortunately. I came across this recently. I'm a mom of three, and my middle daughter is in a mom's group where there was a discussion around, well, thrift shops are meant to be, for people in need or people who need those materials. We should leave thrift shops for, people who need that. And I said that's absolutely not the case. There are so many thrift shops across the world with literally trillions of tons of good product in those thrift shops. So I had to debunk that one. It's interesting the different like myths that you hear out there, Another one that I've heard actually from a Japanese mom I know, which I appreciate, is the cleanliness. There's an issue with cleanliness around thrift. I had to debunk that one as well. I've actually found, like, I've been buying thrift for years and I've never had an issue. And I know I have heard of people having issues, but it's like, you want to be mindful of who you're buying from. You want to obviously look at that item and check it out first. I mean, obviously if there was dirt or there were insects or whatever, something you're not comfortable with, move on to another opportunity to buy secondhand, But by and large, I don't know what your opportunities been, what your experience has been, Jennifer, but I have had zero issues in my 15, 20 years of buying secondhand. So
Yeah, it's been pretty much all positive. Like once in a while you get something that you're like, oh, that turned out to be a dud or whatever. But I mean, I clean every piece of clothing that I get. I wash it before I wear it. And I've gotten better at inspecting things for tears or missing buttons or whatever, because I have had that happen where I didn't look close enough. But like one time I bought a coat recently, a Columbia coat, good brand, here in Ireland. It was like €25, which is, it's a little pricier for used, but it's a good deal for that brand. And I came home and there was €90 in cash in it. So not only did I make up for what I paid for it, I made money on this coat. So like,
yes.
you also have fun surprises like that.
Absolutely. Another great one I heard recently is, when you buy new clothing, new clothing has some chemicals on it, have some,
Heard that.
naturally. And did you see this study recently? I thought this was really great, and we need to get this message out there as well. New clothing, just by its nature, coming out of a manufacturing facility, has chemical content on it. And those chemicals don't come off until you wash that piece, right? And each time you wash that piece, more of the chemicals come off until at a certain point, it doesn't have any more chemical content in it. But with a used item, the chemical content that they saw in this study is far less. I don't want to say zero because I don't know what the exact numbers were in the study, but basically the premise was secondhand clothing has already been washed so many times.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that same chemical load on it. And this really makes a huge difference, especially for babies and children. I mean, think about what we're putting on our children when we're putting these new virgin clothing on them. It has chemicals right there on the fabric. So I thought that was a really great argument for secondhand as well.
Yeah, and then we're just washing it into the water stream, and God knows where it's going. Like, oh, it's so awful.
I know.
Well, going back to you mentioned landfills and incineration, and just a question I was thinking as you were talking. I know some areas they actually are able to use their incinerators to produce energy or heat. Is that, I don't know. It sounds like it's not entirely environmentally friendly because there's still emissions from that. But is that better than just incinerating it, burning it to get rid of it? Or do you know much about that system?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very heated topic, especially in environmental circles. I would just say we try to avoid landfill and incinerating at all costs, whatever possible. But I think what you're saying is clearly there still needs to be some landfilling and incinerating, right? Like we have a lot of waste materials that actually are not currently recyclable or compostable or otherwise divertible. And I think in that case, yes, it is better to be doing something with it. It's better to be creating energy off of it. Yes, I know they can capture the heat and they can create energy off the heat. I also know in some cases, such as like island nations that are really challenged with, they literally do not have any landfill space. So they have no other choice other than ocean dumping or incineration. And certainly between ocean dumping and incineration, I think anybody would pick incineration. I would certainly, as someone in the field, I would pick incineration with some kind of waste to energy. So while I'm not a big proponent of it, I can appreciate that in certain circumstances it is better. Yeah.
God, you even see people burning trash that live like in rural areas that don't have waste collection. In this, I remember in Texas, like you just see smoke coming up, and that can obviously be bad for the smoke, but then also it can start fires that spread, and there's a whole host of issues with that. But yeah, there's still just burn piles in a lot of places, even in modern day. It's very, very sad, but I guess
it's
the
very
infrastructure.
Unfortunately, those do release those chemicals directly into the atmosphere, and we're breathing them right in those areas. And so, yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of like open pit burning or anything like that. I know also I was seeing recently, like in the UK, a lot of illegal dumping going on. There's a big issue with illegal dumping. I don't know if you had read about that. So certainly we need better access, and especially in rural areas, to waste collection and proper waste management. It's something we face in the U.S. in rural areas as well.
Yeah, and you tend to see it a lot with big things like furniture, mattresses, things that are hard to get rid of because like you can't sell a used mattress usually or give it away because it's, there's health issues, but there's also just you can't recycle it. So it's kind of like, well, what do? You're kind of stuck with it. And
well, actually, mattresses are recyclable. I don't know about in Ireland, but we have a couple of really strong mattress recycling programs. There's one in New York City. You could just Google mattress recycling New York City and the name will come up. I believe that one is a female-owned business, and there's a couple across the U.S. So it actually is possible. But of course, it's a highly, a highly detailed process because they have to pick apart all the different materials. As with any recycling, mixed materials is always an issue with recycling. So when you see those milk containers where it's like soft packaging, but it's like a carton. Those are recyclable per se, but you have to have a recycling facility that has the technology to be able to separate those materials. Because that, for example, would be like a mixed material of metal, paper, and plastic in that carton. Just like a mattress is going to have foam, fabric, metal, plastic, and maybe even a couple other materials in there that all have to be carefully separated in order to be diverted. So it's really, building up these programs. I think one thing is definitely, workforce development or like small business development. I think there's a lot of job opportunity here in the circular economy where we can see further development of businesses doing these things like mattress recycling or like electronic waste recycling is a big growing industry. There's a lot of business opportunity here. There's a lot of job opportunity here.
Yeah, and it's a matter of access. Like if you live somewhere that doesn't have the ability to recycle that stuff, or you don't have a car and you can't take it or whatever, like, then, we need to make it so that people can do it. Like you said, it's about convenience. And
Yes.
I guess, what do you think is the likelihood that these practices can be implemented, that we can make it, accessible to most of the population? Obviously, there's always going to be little pockets, but like, how do we actually build the infrastructure for that?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I know we're seeing some of that on Colorado's Front Range, just to use us as an example. So we have the EcoCycle facility here that does recycling, as well as our Charm facility, which is a hard to recycle material facility. And we see that many rural communities are driving here from like the mountain region across Colorado. What they might do is they might stockpile their materials for a month or so, or maybe even 2 months, and then they have a designated person who drives these materials down to EcoCycle, which is in Boulder. But I think that's a really good example of what we could see in other rural areas as well, or where you have metropolises near rural areas, and you're doing something where you're stockpiling, or perhaps warehousing, and it might have to be longer periods of time. It could be maybe 2, 3, 6 months, or maybe even up to a year if it's not like organic materials that could break down and cause stench or anything like that. I think another opportunity for rural areas is having their own small facilities, where more, maybe if it's not like the waste handling itself, it's more of upstream. Thinking about, could we have a little repair facility where folks could get together for a repair market, or a reuse market, and things like that. There's no reason why that couldn't happen in a rural area if you have people who have those skills, the skills to repair, the skills to, be, of course, we can all barter and things like that. I have seen that in some small towns. I spent some time in Maine and upstate New York, and I've seen this going on, where you have these small, repair fests, or reuse opportunity or bartering opportunities. So I think we could see more of that, and it's amazing how much that can divert these materials from landfill incineration, right? Because if you can repair your goods and you can extend the use out of them, there's less likelihood that you're having to trash them.
Yeah, I get excited when I hear about repair workshops and things that encourage people to
True.
learn how to sew, how to fix a button, a zipper, whatever, even objects, and electronics. Like, it is slowly becoming a thing. But yeah, I think people are just not used to fixing before replacing. And
Correct.
that's
And
because, yeah,
that's part of shifting that mindset, right?
yeah.
And hopefully people wanting to think about gaining more skills again, having a little more time on their hand and wanting to gain a certain skill. I know that there is iFixit. Have you heard of iFixit? That is
Yeah, we actually interviewed someone from them a few years ago. So great, great company.
Yes, and all over the world, you can use their repair manuals to figure out how to repair your electronics. And then at the same time, to bolster that, we're seeing the Right to Repair Acts across the world, where we
Yeah.
are mandating, hopefully, municipalities or countries are mandating upon the manufacturers that they must give us the right to repair. They must give us the right to be able to break into our phones and other gadgets and stuff, and be able to replace certain things that are broken, replace parts, and make repairs. Because there have been a lot of products where they literally made it so that consumers could not get into that product to make a repair.
Yeah, it's intentional, so you buy more to prevent
Exactly.
obsolescence. It's so gross.
And obsolescence. I think it's just so important that we all support the right to repair, and obviously we call our lawmakers. And if there is a right to repair bill in your area, please, please, please support it. It's so important.
Yeah. Something that I used a lot when I was in the States, it's not so common here, but is TerraCycle, which allows you to mail in hard to recycle items. Like, if you eat a lot of, I don't know, drink a lot of Capri Suns, those weird foily packages that aren't recyclable in a normal facility, they might have a system, a program where you can collect them and mail them in for free. Some of them do have a charge to them for the shipping, but usually they have like free, a lot of free programs, and it's just great because, speaking of convenience, like, you can send it in. Now, I don't know how environmentally sound that is, having to mail them, but it is another option for some of that stuff.
I could speak to that a bit. I will say that I think as a last option, if you can't avoid it, I think TerraCycle is a good thing. I think that they're doing a really good job of collecting many materials that are out there. and making them into new products and things like that. However, I did visit their facility, and I did observe that they also end up stockpiling a lot of stuff, which is not necessarily their fault. I think they have a huge volume of materials that come in, and it's hard for them to get to everything and process everything. And it's also very hard for them to find end materials to make, to take those hard to recycle materials and make them into new materials. So I think, well, TerraCycle is very good and I'm supportive. It's still better to avoid them and to avoid to have to use them, and to do that by basically making smarter purchasing choices, avoiding materials that are not recyclable, making your own, using reusables. When it comes to something like a Capri Sun, perhaps you could go to an outlet that has, refillable sodas or refillable things rather than using those Capri Suns. Just as an example. So yeah, so all to say that I support TerraCycle, but it should be a last choice. It shouldn't be like your plan for what you're going to do. If there's an opportunity to not buy that material that isn't recyclable, don't buy that material. Does that make sense?
And encourage the manufacturer to come up with better packaging that's
correct.
Recyclable.
Correct. We want to be pushing all these manufacturers to ultimately be switching to reusable packaging or fully compostable, biodegradable packaging. But really reusable is really the best. What we've found in our research is that reusable packaging always wins as far as environmental factors, and it best for the environment.
Yeah, because a lot of times I buy something and I think, God, that's such a pretty tin. But I don't buy it for the package. But if I was going to buy something anyways, and there's a pretty container or nice cloth something that I can reuse, then I'm more likely to get that one, because like they used to make dresses out of rice sacks or flour sacks or something back in the day. And there's just so, if you get creative, you can think of all these ways to reuse things and make them more interesting. And why did we get away from that?
I know. I don't know why we did, but we got to get back there. So
I know. Well, we've covered a lot in this last hour. I guess, can you just kind of talk about how the average person could help encourage more sustainable waste management and EPR regulations in their own communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would encourage you to definitely think about calling your lawmakers. If you just kind of Google around to see what's going on in your region or your municipality or your state or your country, I'm sure you will see that there's some either EPR or some kind of sustainable legislation that you could support. It actually makes a big difference calling your lawmakers. I recently went to Lobby Day at the Colorado State Capitol, where I was able to lobby our lawmakers related to upcoming sustainability related legislation, including EPR. And it was really fascinating, and they really want to hear from us. And this is across the whole world. In general, our lawmakers really want to hear from us. They want to do the right thing, and they want to do what their constituents want to see happen, or they want to positively impact constituents and their families. So I think that's the single biggest thing I would encourage, other than just running for office yourself. If this is something that you're really passionate about and you have an interest in running for office, obviously that's always a way to go as well. And then I think just not being afraid to talk about these issues with friends and family. It's really important that we have this as part of our cultural diaspora, to talk about these issues. Microplastics is a real issue today, thinking about reusables and thinking about circularity and how we can keep things in the loop. I think it's really important that we all keep up these conversations and encourage it as it relates to parties or holidays or babies. There's so many opportunities to make more sustainable choices. And I think if we're the squeaky wheel, right, we can have a big impact on our families and our friends and the events and things that we're privy to. I mean, like, for example, weddings, babies being born, all of these are opportunities to make a difference as far as making more sustainable choices. I'm a huge proponent, you might have read back in the days, of cloth diapers, for example, but events are huge waste generators, right? But they don't have to be. A wedding doesn't have to be a huge waste generator. We could think about how to, use all reusables, to have, if we have giveaways, to have much more sustainable giveaways that are actually usable for people. So this is my life's work. But I think even if you're listening and you don't work in sustainability, my message to you is that there's so much you can do to make an impact, just by talking to people about these issues and making them aware of these issues.
Yeah, I have found like I'm always that person in any group that's railing on about sustainability and being annoying about, you shouldn't eat this or do that. But and I just kind of thought, whatever, people are not listening, they're brushing me off. But every once in a while, someone would come to me and say, well, what should I do about this? Or what do you think about this practice or whatever, or I'm looking to replace this in my life, and like, oh, they actually listen, and they think that I know what I'm talking about once in a while, so
Yes,
that's a
I
little
do.
reaffirming.
Exactly. I've had the same experience. And I think that what I have noticed is maybe talking a little bit less and just using your
Hmm.
actions more. So
Yeah.
I'll make sure that my behaviors are more sustainable, or what I'm doing. I'll invite everybody over for a party, and the party is 100% zero waste.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then those people are noticing. Oh,
Hmm.
wow. How did you pull this off? You have all your juice in this big glass thing, and it's all reusable cups, and you're not doing any giveaways. And you said, no presents, please. My big thing has been no presents, please, for all my kids' parties. And that
Hmm.
it makes a huge difference, and I think it also impacts how kids see parties and events with their friends. It's not about consumption. It's about having a good time with my friends, you know?
Experiences. Yeah.
Exactly. So even if you're nervous to speak about it with friends, I think just showing those good actions and those good
Hmm.
sustainability behaviors makes a big difference.
Yeah, people do notice even if they don't say anything, a lot of
100%.
times.
100%.
um, yeah, real quick, I just want to ask, because you mentioned talking to your representatives, elected officials, et cetera. Is it as effective to write a company or to reach out and say, hey, I love your product, but I'd love for you to package it in more sustainable stuff? Does that work, I guess, in your opinion, or is it just yelling into the void?
I've written a couple of the bigger companies. My daughter and I have written Coca-Cola a couple times. You're probably aware that Coca-Cola is the number one polluter on planet Earth. As far as when people do beach cleanups, all the beach cleanups are happening around the world. They are now counting all that data, and
Mm.
Coca-Cola is typically coming up as the number one polluter on the planet. And so my daughter was interested in writing. We've written Coca-Cola a couple times, the CEO, and they didn't get back to us. But on the other hand, I have written smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses, and I have gotten a lot of feedback from those businesses. So I would say give it a shot.
Hmm.
Don't give up. Don't think that it's not, that it's a fruitless effort. I think it
Yeah.
often could be. Maybe Coca-Cola is a bad example, and other big companies would respond.
Yeah.
Um,
Shame
that's the
them on
one.
social media. I don't know if that's more effective, but
I know, I know. There's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of people who are doing that already, like Skip the Stuff. Do you know Skip the Stuff?
I
They're a
think
great one to
so.
follow on
Yeah.
social media. They do a ton of research. They have a lot of really good stats around waste and
Mm.
materials management and circularity. And they do occasionally do some shaming, but like light shaming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that is
Well,
positive.
and it's not a huge effort, either. And you're not going to like lose hours of your day probably sending an email, but I just thought I'd ask because I know a lot of people say, I contacted the company about this or that. And I always kind of wondered, do they actually, it varies obviously company to company, but
I would say
I guess
biggest bang
it
for
can't
the buck
hurt.
that I've found is small to medium sized businesses where you're more likely to get a response.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, are there any resources you'd like to share with listeners who want to learn more about anything we've talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely check out our website, thinkzerollc.com. We have a zero waste blog where we're always updating it. I just posted yesterday about zero waste for parents and babies. I encourage you to read that one if you have a baby coming or a baby in the family or you have small children. Another one that I really like if you really want to geek out on circularity is Upstream. Upstream is a great resource. They're a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to reusables and the growth of reusables around the world. So I really love them a lot. I read them every week. Um, I'm trying to think of a couple. I mentioned Skip the Stuff. Skip the Stuff is a great one. And Skip the Stuff is on social media. They're on Instagram, and they do a lot of materials that you could even use with students and things like that. Like a lot of really great graphics for describing the issue of waste today and the issue of circularity. So I would definitely check that one out as well.
Perfect. And we will link to this on our show notes for anyone interested in following up with any of that. Um, I guess we'll move on now to the green life hack portion of the show. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about how, consumers are not responsible for fixing all of the environmental issues in the world, but we can still make a difference in our actions. So on that note, what is one thing that you would suggest to our listeners that they can do to live more sustainably if they had to start today and wanted to implement one thing?
One thing, well, I have to say it because I said it before. The number one thing you can do in your household or business to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions is to compost. Um, as I mentioned before, there's just a lot of methane emissions that come off of that. Not only that, but we also have a problem worldwide with our soils are degraded, basically, and so we need to be making our soils more healthful and more nutritious for growing plants and the things that we rely on for food. So composting really has I would say many benefits, not only improving our soil, diverting from landfill incineration, reducing methane emissions, but also there's job opportunities here. There's a growing market for, composting systems and the composting industry around the world. So it's actually like there's a whole industry there. But for those of you who are already composting, is it okay, Jennifer, if I say a second thing?
Yeah, sure.
One other second hack for those that are already composting, I would say consider secondhand first. And as we were saying before, not just for clothes and shoes, but for all things. I'm just a huge believer in this, and especially if you have a family with children where you just have massive quantities of stuff you're going to have around for the next 20 years before your kids get out of the house. I encourage you to look at whatever the kids' thrift shops are around you. Even for sports goods, there's a really good one in the US. I don't know if it's in Europe, but it's called Play It Again Sports. And they have almost everything you need for secondhand sports equipment. There's a group that I really like called Once Upon a Child, which is across the US, and they're a kids consignment shop. And then now there's all these opportunities online as well. There's so many opportunities to buy kids' clothing online secondhand. So things like Poshmark even has like kids' clothes now. ThreadUp is one I've been using for years. I love ThreadUp. I think you can buy from ThreadUp in Europe as well. So really, truly endless opportunities. And then the other one I love to use is eBay. And eBay can be for really specific secondhand materials. Like lots of people are selling Halloween costumes on eBay. Halloween is a huge source of waste across the US and all around the world now. And I think we really need to be thinking about, again, either making it yourself or buying secondhand. And so I encourage you to use eBay and all these other resources that are out there for secondhand shopping.
I have to say, eBay is so underrated. Like people don't think it's still a thing, but I have found the most random specific parts to a bread maker or this or that I'm like, I have it.
Yep.
I did want to ask you real quick. You were talking about online thrift stores. Is it true that if you buy new clothing from a lot of retailers and then you mail it in and return it, they just throw it away because it's cheaper than restocking it? I've heard that.
Yes. That is true, although it is changing, fortunately. There now are these restock companies that are buying the restock.
Okay.
But yes, as of like 10 years ago, most companies were actually just throwing that stuff away. Fortunately, that has changed today. Like the Amazons of the world, as we know, you can now buy like something that was returned. You know how you can buy on Amazon like an box? Me personally, I have a lifelong commitment to no Amazon. I haven't purchased anything from Amazon for roughly 10 years. But for those of us that are still buying on Amazon, they do actually have sort of a secondhand option where you can buy something that was returned. I think it's called opened box.
Yeah.
That is good that they have that option. The Walmarts of the world and the large box retails, most of them now are actually selling those returns. So fortunately, it's not the same issue as it was 10 years ago, but that doesn't mean that some of the smaller retailers aren't doing it. I think if I had to guess, some of the smaller retailers are probably doing it. And it's just it's mostly because of operationally, they don't have the money to process those items that are coming back in. And so they'd rather just like get rid of them. But fortunately, that issue has resolved to some extent, particularly with the larger big box retailers.
Yeah, it's just such a waste. Like the waste that goes into producing the product, mailing it, and then all it does is go to landfill unused anyway. Well, my green life hack for this month is very simple because we're talking about ways to use less products that have extra packaging. As I was washing my hands earlier, I thought, I switched to bar soap, both for hand washing and for bathing years ago, because the plastic that comes along with the bottles obviously is unnecessary. So if you're able to, try bar soap if you don't already use it, because I think we've all kind of gotten into that. Oh, it has to be a gel and it has to be frothy and liquidy, and use the loofah and all that stuff. But yeah, I've been very happy, and it's less waste and it lasts forever. So that's mine. It's just go to bar soap, go back to bar soap, try it out. So
I love that too. Yeah. And also, I don't know if you saw, there's another little hack just related to bar soap. You know, the little pieces of bar soap we end up having left, and you're like,
yeah,
oh, it's too small to
never
get
quite use it up.
pennies. Yeah, you can get one of those little coconut soap bags that they sell at a lot of stores
Mhm.
now. It's like to hold your soap when you travel. Put all the pieces in there and then use
Yeah.
that with your soap, and it becomes like a frothy scrub. I just did it the other day and it was fantastic.
Oh, that's
So I
brilliant.
highly recommend it.
Yeah, because I always end up trying to like paste it to the new bar, and then eventually it'll wear down, but it doesn't always stick. And anyways, that's good to
Exactly.
know though. Yeah, great way to use up old shavings of bars.
That's a hack on a hack, right?
Yeah, exactly. Our favorite kind. Well,
Yes.
Sarah, thank you so much. I could go on about this stuff for hours and hours. There's just so much to
Me
talk
too.
about. But yeah, if folks want to learn more, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so thinkzerollc.com, that's our website. You can also find me on LinkedIn just under Sarah Currie-Halpern or Think Zero LLC. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, and you can find us under either Think Zero LLC or Think Zero LLC on both of those as well. So
Perfect.
please look us up. We're always putting out a lot of information about how to be zero waste in your life, how to travel zero waste, how to be zero waste both in business and in home.
Yeah, great resource. Well, we'll again link to that in the show notes, and you can find the show on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky, and YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, as I mentioned at the beginning, and also on buymeacoffee.com. You can find me personally on Instagram and Blue Sky at Het's Gonna Be Me. So, Sarah, thank you again for being on, and everyone else, have a great rest of your day.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.